Let's talk about the 9 books I read in February. I started my month off strong with Several People Are Typing, a really weird but really good short story about a man who accidentally finds his consciousness uploaded into his work Slack message board, and then no one believes him and thinks he's doing a bit when he tries to convince people, and then things just get weirder from there. This was surprisingly very tender in a way that I really enjoyed. Then I finally got around to reading and finishing The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which was incredibly informative and very accessible and a book that I highly recommend. Reading it was a difficult experience in that I was going back and forth between what I was seeing on social media and seeing the exact events be documented from many years ago in this book. But I think one of the most important things to highlight is that nothing we're seeing is new. Nothing we're seeing is a recent development. Then I finally got around to reading Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo, her first adult novel, and also a magical realism novel. It's a story that mainly focuses on the women within one family and the magical abilities that they're born with. It also explores their complicated and very interesting relationships with one another, their relationships with themselves and their abilities, and how these abilities affect these relationships even further. And it is most definitely Acevedo's most mature and experimental book that she's put out so far. But I think what I really love about it is that despite it being so distinctly different from her other books, it's still undeniably her. It's still undeniably an Elizabeth Acevedo book. It's still her voice, and I just have a lot of thoughts about it at all times. Then I read Viciously Yours because I saw a screenshot about the guy cutting off the skin on his arms where another woman touched him because the main character was jealous, and I wanted to see if he really did do that, and he did, and also the book just wasn't good. And it wasn't even like bad in a fun way. It was bad in a way that was very annoying, very boring, very overly repetitive. And I also hated the cherry on top, which was the warning pages at the beginning of the book telling you that it was going to be bad. I think one of my biggest pet peeves when reading is a noticeable lack of effort. Then I returned to my Pride and Prejudice kick and read books 1 and 2 for Fitzwilliam Darcy Werewolf Hunter. I need this to be updated soon. It hasn't been updated in a couple years. I would like further development. It is genuinely pretty interesting, although it deviates very far in more ways than just the werewolves from the original source material. I'm not a fan of the bold moves Darcy's putting on Lizzie in this interpretation. I read The Vampire's Darcy, which was a wild ride. This is another Pride and Prejudice adaptation, but Mr. Darcy's a vampire, and he has an identical twin brother who's like the other Mr. Darcy, who's also a vampire, and Lizzie is not a vampire hunter, but is like associated with vampire hunters. And it's really weird, but it's not like bad weird. I also need further development on this. Then I finally finished Pride and Premeditation, which is a crime retelling where Lizzie Bennet is an aspiring lawyer and Mr. Darcy's a lawyer, and Mr. Bingley has just been framed for murder, and Lizzie wants to try and solve the case in order to prove herself as like a woman in law. And this I put in the same mental category as like those Hallmark adaptations where it's not Pride and Prejudice, but the character names of Pride and Prejudice are inserted onto the characters, and that's what makes it Pride and Prejudice, apparently. I think it's like good and fun as a short and sweet and easy to follow murder mystery. I don't think that this is a very good, strong, or faithful, or really anything familiar Pride and Prejudice adaptation. It scraps the entirety of what makes Pride and Prejudice, but keeps some elements that are vaguely similar to the romance aspect of Lizzie and Darcy. But like even then it's barely. And then I finished my month having finally finished after 2 months the Count of Monte Cristo, which I made a whole video about. That was very rambly and very something. I also have since rewatched the 2002 film because I've seen it before and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't like have context. That is not the Count of Monte Cristo. That is a movie that is vaguely inspired by the Count of Monte Cristo in prison scene alone. The main cast is hot though, and I had fun with it. So it's not the Count of Monte Cristo, but I will continue to keep watching this movie. This book, however, like was my Everest, and it has been my Everest for quite some time. It's so extensive. It keeps going, and it did something to me. It did something permanent to me that I can't fully articulate. But I loved this book. Hate the ending. Loved this book. And with the books I'm currently reading now, I expect March to be very interesting and very much so filled with more gay angels.